affecting their children's education. The focus of this evening's discussion will be the continued need for a remote learning option during the upcoming school year. Although the mayor and the DOE chancellor have unilaterally decided against a remote option, many parents and students continue to have concerns about the return to full in-person instruction. Tonight, you will hear from several parent leaders as they voice their concerns related to the return to in-person instruction while COVID-19 remains a threat and the Delta variant is on the rise. We are honored to be joined this evening by CSA President Mark Cannizzaro. Mr. Cannizzaro has publicly stated his concerns with the city's abrupt decision to completely rule out a remote option this fall. He joins us tonight as an ally in our continued fight. I ask you to please now give your attention to my fellow parent leader, Lourdes Jabot, who will introduce our guest of honor.
Thank you, Gina, and good evening to everyone. CSA President Mark Cannizzaro has been a New York City educator for more than 35 years. Born and raised in Staten Island, New York, Mr. Cannizzaro is the son of a Korean War veteran and a school secretary. Growing up in the New York City public school system, he had plans to join the police or fire department like others in his blue-collar neighborhood until he was inspired by his teachers to follow in their footsteps. He received his bachelor's degree in physical education from SUNY Cortland in 1986, a master's degree in special education in 1990, and a 6-year certificate in supervision and administration in 1993, both from the College of Staten Island. Additionally, Mr. Cannizzaro completed studies at Cornell University's AFL-CIO Union Leadership Institute in 2014. Mr. Cannizzaro began his career teaching physical education at Taunton Intermediate School on Staten Island, where in 1994, he received the Angela Serpiet's Outstanding Physical Educator Award. In 1995, he was named assistant principal at Taunton, and 8 years later, 2003, he was named principal of Paolo Intermediate School, which was subsequently recognized as a model middle school by Region 7 in 2005. Mr. Cannizzaro first became active in CSA in 2006, serving briefly as District 31 Assistant District Chair before his election as one of the union's vice presidents in the fall of that year. In 2008, he also began simultaneously serving as CSA Secretary and was named CSA Executive Vice President in September of 2012. He served as CSA's Chief Negotiator from 2012 to 2017, successfully negotiating the current collective bargaining agreement and assumed the CSA presidency in September of 2017. Mr. Cannizzaro is also president of the New York State Federation of School Administrations, a position he has held since October 1st of 2015, and a vice president of the American Federation of School Administrators. He is a member of the New York Academy of Public Education and the Middle School Principals Association of New York City, having served as MSPA's president from 2009 through 2011. Mr. Cannizzaro is the recipient of many awards and honors, including the 2008 Entertainers for Education Outstanding Leadership Award, a 2004 Cannes Fellowship from the Teachers College of Columbia University, the 2013 Educator of the Year Award from St. John's University's Pi Delta Kappa International, the Emerald Society's 2015 Irish Pro de Patria Award, the 2016 Thomas C. Giordano Leadership in Education Award from the Forum of Italian American Educators, and the 2019 Medalist Award from the New York Academy of Public Education. In addition, City and State Magazine has included him on several of their lists, highlighting the most influential figures in labor and education. It is with great pleasure and privilege that I welcome tonight's special guest, Mr. Mark Cannizzaro, CSA President. Welcome.
Good evening, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. And I hope, first of all, that everyone here is safe and their loved ones are safe at this time. If you are safe and healthy, I know that you are truly blessed, especially with what's been going on in the world. Two of my children, along with my wife, suffered from COVID. My middle child had a long, difficult battle, but fortunately, they're all okay now. But I know that we all know someone or many people who are not as fortunate. A family from my church lost both parents and 3 of 5 children to this terrible disease. And I know that many of you suffered great loss, as well, as it is no secret that the Bronx has been disproportionately affected by COVID. So as a parent and an educator and a principal for 9 years before coming to CSA, I know that your number one concern is the physical and emotional health and safety of your children. And that concern is more pronounced now more than ever before. And I can tell you that this is also the number one concern of your child's principal. I know that in order for a school to be successful, there must be a high level of trust between the school, especially the school leaders and families. And that trust is not always built on agreeing with each other, but it certainly is built on honesty and transparency. Over the past 18 months, I've been forced to state publicly that a lack of clear guidance and changing guidance from the city and Department of Education has led in some cases to a breakdown of that trust that families cherish and school leaders work very hard to earn. This afternoon, I spent some time viewing the July 1st forum with the Chancellor, and I must compliment the Bronx Parent Leaders Advocacy Group. Each speaker was not only well prepared, but really spoke from the heart, and I'm anxious to hear from you today. Much of my team, unfortunately, is on vacation today, but since you reached out to me and we had trouble finding a date, I didn't want to delay this meeting any further. However, I do have joining us former Bronx principal and current CSA field director from the Bronx, Mr. Frank Patterson. With that, I will turn it back over, and I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you so much, President Cannizzaro. And now we will have Marie Will and Jennifer Goddard to make the case for the remote option and ask for your partnership.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Marie Will. I'm a physician and a biomedical scientist. I've been in New York City a while. I got both my MD and my PhD degrees here in New York City. And I now have the pleasure of also being a New York City school parent. I have a lot of concerns about our opening plan for the falls I'd like to share with you. As you already alluded to, COVID's claimed at least 500 children in the United States. 25% of those are perfectly healthy children with no pre-existing condition. The other 75 have some pre-existing conditions, but you may think there's some rare childhood illnesses. They're not. The two most commonly listed is asthma and obesity, 2 very common childhood conditions. But death isn't the only measure, right? When it comes to children, thousands of children have been hospitalized, many needing ICU level care, mechanical ventilation. Even those who have quote unquote mild disease, 1 in 20 can go on to suffer from the entity that we now know as long COVID. 1 in 20 is not a small number. So you and I both know 1 in 20 is at least 1 in every classroom. And of those, even away from that long COVID there are many, many other sequelae, neurologic disturbances, endocrine disturbances, and other consequences. And people always say that children get ill all the time, which is the flu. Let me just assure you that it's not. The flu, according to the CDC, kills about 100 children a year. On a bad year, it could go to 200. But I've already told you, COVID's claimed 500 of our kids. Now, I understand that these numbers pale in comparison to the burden of illness on adults. But let me just rephrase what Dr. Walensky once said: children are not supposed to die. There is simply no acceptable number of preventable child deaths. Of course, there are lots of benefit in in-person school, and I look forward to sending my kids back as a parent who depends on school for childcare as well as education. And I was kind of hopeful before in the spring and the summer, but then the Delta variant hits. And I think you would agree with me that that completely changes everything. It is much more infectious, much higher viral load. It carries a higher risk of severe illness and hospitalization, especially in children. So even now, we are setting records. We're at the height of pediatric hospitalization from the entire pandemic. Many hospital systems are running out of space. Excuse me. And not only is that a national crisis, it's also a local one. COVID cases are rising sharply here. We're almost at 4% positivity. Some neighborhood up to 14%. Hospitalization is increasing, including in the summer school program, summer rising, with only about 20% of the staff and students that would be there in the fall. Yesterday alone, there were 54 new cases, 24 students, 30 staff. Yesterday alone, there were 51 new classroom closures in that one day. In total, there are over 300 classrooms that are currently closed, not cumulatively, currently. And yet we have no mechanism in place to safeguard our children, right? We don't have robust testing or tracing. We don't have vaccine for the under 12 group. We don't have adequate spacing or ventilation. We don't have vaccine mandate. We also now don't have a remote option. And you can imagine that's essentially asking us to take a chance, except it's a chance on the life of our children. And that chance is not the same for every child. Some kids may have pre-existing condition like we talk about. Some live in multi-generational household. And I'm acutely aware that some don't even have access to physicians or healthcare like myself. And so these kids' needs are different. But even if all of these needs are different, I really believe that our job as a community is to take care of each other. Principals and teachers are on the side of children and as our parents, and I hope that we can work together to make that safety a reality for our kids. Now I'll turn it over to Jennifer to speak some more.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marie. Good evening, President Cannizzaro. I am a parent of this 9-year-old boy, August. He's a student at PS 216 in Sheepshead Bay, out here in Brooklyn, not far from you. So in Staten Island. So I want to say thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy. I'm pleased to hear that you're an ally. So I'll try not to, I'll temper my tone because I'm very angry. As you can imagine, most parents on this call are. And so it's not directed towards you. My son was kept home in remote schooling because he has asthma and an overactive immune disorder, and joined 700,000 other students in remote schooling. He also received speech language therapy and at-risk counseling because of his ADHD and his anxiety because of his IEP. So thinking, on top of the medical issues that Marie just expertly explained, we also have a mental health crisis kind of coming our way right now, where we have students who have been in services for mental health issues who are now going to be going back. And even if we have the 6,000 promised social worker army waiting at the doorsteps when my son arrives at school, his anxiety is going to be a tremendous impediment to his learning. If he's in person schooling, if he's rushed into it, I should say also. In fact, a recent research study conducted by one of the local nonprofits that the Bronx group works with found out of 400 students surveyed that 90% of students want to stay home to stay safe. 88% are afraid of dying or losing a loved one to COVID. 30% reported losing a loved one to COVID. So we have a very real mental health crisis facing us in the coming months. We've tried our best as parents to keep him, in counseling over the summer independently, and done every precaution we can to keep him safe. However, Wednesday, he lost his sense of smell. And it was a very harrowing couple of days here, but thankfully, thank God, he came back, his test is negative. I'm assuming it's his asthma and his allergies that were triggered. So, but then again, I look for, towards next month, and we may not be so lucky next time. We're being forced into a very dangerous situation. There are 500,000 students under the age of 12, just like my son, who cannot get vaccinated. Just like my son, 22% of them are Hispanic Latino. That's my child. 13% are Black, 9% are Asian, 8% are white. You know, these are statistics, but then when you look at the statistics of children who were directly impacted by COVID, the large majority of them are minorities who lived in places like the Bronx. So we have to look, when we're looking at the remote option, we have to remember that the 700,000 that were in remote were by and large Black, Latino, and Asian. So this is a group of people who are, once again, what are we going to be passed over or you know, mistreated? They have these high rates of deaths in their neighborhoods. So we look at Summer Rising like Marie just did, and you look at a map that's literally covered with blue dots. I mean, like I look at it on my phone and I'm like, where's New York City? Like the whole thing is covered in blue dots and it's only 1/5 of the population. What's going to happen when they're all supposed to be back in there? So I feel like what the DOE today, just 1 month from today, is expecting parents like me, parents like those who are on this call, who can't be vaccinated and their children are vulnerable, is to choose between having an education or their child's life. And I want to know, what does the DOE, what do the teachers, I'm sure, would agree with us. Which do you suggest we choose, education or a child's life? You know, and I'm going to choose my child's life every damn time. I'm going to choose my kid's life. And so if that means keeping him home this fall, I'm willing to do it. I have never considered homeschooling as an option. Never. It's like this bizarre, you know, it's like a spelling bee student kid you see on TV that's homeschooled, you know, like it's been a foreign concept, but now all of a sudden I'm researching these things and I'm taking it very seriously, because to protect my child's life, I will do it. The mayor keeps talking about a plan A. A plan B is like, you know, all these parents are supposed to believe that teachers and students are going to miraculously show up on September 13th completely vaccinated. But even if that's the case, my child's not among them. 500,000 students are not among them. So that, you know, insinuating that, oh, well, we did fine last year, you know, without vaccines, we'll be fine this year. He said this in the Post, I think. But last year we didn't have the Delta variant, which is causing more infections among children, higher than ever, right? So it's disingenuous to cherry pick these data, to cherry pick political pawns, especially when it comes to children. The mayor couldn't shut up about my kid when he was in UPK, right? And now my kid's 9 years old and he's trying to survive a pandemic and it's like crickets. So it's unimaginably cruel for a government employee, for a government agency like the DOE in the mayor's office to take federal tax dollars that I have contributed to and not offer remote learning to my child who isn't yet eligible for a vaccine. It's unimaginably cruel. It's also discrimination against where everyone else is protected except for them, right? The decision to refuse parents a remote option is a civil rights violation. It begs the question of equal protection, especially because of all the alternatives, which are woefully inadequate. Homeschooling 5 hours a week. My kid's in school 6 hours a day. Like, what is that going to do for me, right? Homeschooling, that's a hardship for me. I got to take time out of my day now to do this. Maybe I have more than one kid, like several parents on this call who are in different grades. That's a hardship on me, right? That's inadequate. Then saying, oh, maybe private schools. I got to pay thousands of dollars now, even though I've already funded the DOE. No. So all of these options are not, they're denying my student, my child who has disabilities, right, and qualifies under the 504, the Accommodation Act, for a free, appropriate public education. He's now being denied this, okay? And it requires that all public schools that receive federal funding provide equal access to education with physical and or mental disabilities. So keeping my kid at home, it's what I'm going to do, right? If they don't offer me, if all they're offering me is in-person learning, I'm going to have no choice. But this seems like an existential crisis for the DOE because they've already lost 10% of their student population. So are they willing to risk another 20, 30% more because of this line they want to toe? So, you know, working with families to offer remote options, and I beg you to please use your platform. I know you're already doing it, and I'm like blown away. The statement that you came out with in the paper yesterday was like, you know, manna from heaven. I thank you for that. But, you know, working with us to mitigate this fast approaching legal, existential, and health public safety crisis by offering a remote option that's already been viable in the past is clearly in the best interest of the student educationally, which is what the state guidelines say, right? They say if it's in the best interest of the student educationally, remote options must be considered. And here we all are here tonight arguing that very same thing, not offering remote option to children who aren't vaccinated and who are especially vulnerable or have families who are immunocompromised. That's forcing us parents to choose between their life and their education. And I ask you, what do you think we should choose?
Well, first of all, Dr. Will and Dr. Will, first of all, I can't even comment on what you said. You're a medical professional, and you're out of my league. And I certainly would hope that the Department of Education in the city of New York have their doctors also engage in a conversation with you, because as you know, we have the city doctors offering different types of opinions to everyone. So I think that would be a healthy discussion for the medical professionals to get together and have that conversation. And Ms. Goddard, I do have to tell you that sitting here and listening to you actually brought me back to my days as a principal, sitting behind a desk and hearing the love and the passion of a parent for their child. And it really made me a little emotional, and as I know you were getting as emotional as well. So I hear you, and I understand. I do understand. I can tell you that as you know, at this point, the mayor has made the decision that he is not offering a remote option, but I think it's in the mayor's history. It's early, and I don't know if he will reconsider or not, but you make some excellent points beyond the emotional and love aspect of a child and the health aspect of a child. You make the practical points of we've already lost too many children in the public education system. And if parents are going to vote with their feet going forward, which I'm sure some of them will and many of them will, it will, I believe, because I'm not in the mayor's, closed door discussions, but I believe it will make them and him sit up and take notice. You mentioned the press statement I made, and the reason I made the press statement most recently is because where the CDC guidance was saying that students must be distanced by 3 feet where possible, right? That was the CDC guidance, and principals were able to prepare for where possible. Now, we could have a debate about whether or not that's good health practice or not, but that's what the CDC guidance said. And then suddenly, and I believe this group has something to do with the mayor's decision to say no everywhere, but the fact of the matter is everywhere is not practical. So you can't do both. You have to, in New York City schools, especially those that are relatively crowded, and it doesn't mean crowded by how many students are in the school. It means crowded by how many students the school is supposed to fit compared to how many students are in the school. So I hear you. I heard people in July also, and the passion I heard, and it's real. And I think at the very least, you guys are owed a platform with the mayor so that he can hear and listen and make a decision. He sent the chancellor to listen to you, and the chancellor did, and I think she did a great job, and she listened, but she was not the decision maker here. And I'm here to listen to you as an educator, because that's who I am and what I do. But I'm not the decision maker here. The mayor is the decision maker here. So I would hope that at some point he'll get the message that he should at least listen, and then make his decision from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Cannizzaro. So now we are having an open discussion section for about 5 minutes, because our parents are so angry and so passionate that it became necessary to have that moment. So each person who would like to say something, you have less than a minute to say something, so that the president can hear you. Raise your hand or unmute yourself and speak. So, Mr. Frank Patterson, would you like to say something as we are waiting for parents who may want to say something?
Sure. I mean, it's glad to be back among my Bronx people. So it's nice to see you guys. I just reiterate what Mark said. We need, whatever we do, we need clear guidance on how we're going to do it. And the less clear guidance we have, the harder, whether we do remote or not, it's going to be. We need to be very clear about what we're doing going forward if it's going to be effective in implementing a good instructional plan.
Okay, thank you. So parents, and I speak for the panel. Aurora, would you like to say something? Carla, could you let Aurora say something, please? Less than
Hi,
a minute,
President.
Aurora.
Hi, President Cannizzaro. As a CEC rep for District 8, I have visited most of the schools and they are all overcrowded. This is going to be virtually impossible. That spread is going to go like wildfire. And the mayor refuses to come to the table with us. The Bronx Plague has sent out numerous messages to him. We need to get the mayor to sit down and listen to us, and we've been hitting a brick wall.
So is there any way, President Cannizzaro, that you can use your influence to get the mayor to the table?
I have a hard time using my influence to get the mayor to listen to anything, but I can certainly let him know about this conversation and you know, go from there. But you know, if I could influence the mayor, there's a lot of things I think that might have happened differently in the course of education in the last 8 years. But I will certainly let him know. I'm sure he is aware. I'm sure the chancellor has told him, as well as you folks reaching out. But I would also suggest that CECs from the Bronx invite him to a CEC meeting and try to get him to come out for that as well. I don't know if he'll be successful, but you know, we can certainly try, and I will mention it as well.
Can I also say, I mean, I try to give you all the facts as a medical professional, but we're talking about feelings as medical professionals. We are also just tired, you guys. We're tired. How many times do we have to put our lives on the line in order to protect other people who won't do basic things like, no, 3 feet distancing is not 2.5, and no, if children are sick, they should quarantine, and you know, and yes, their children should have a remote option for kids who have pre-existing conditions, right? Like, we're not all in the same boat. We shouldn't be treated like a monolithic, because the result of what is happening now is not just that my kid's gonna get sick. If you allow this virus to spread, I think everyone's been saying this, the next thing that happens is you're gonna get a mutation that evade the vaccine. And then all hell breaks loose. And that's even if the children don't get sick. And I just told you that, yes, they do. But even if that wasn't the case, I don't know how to explain to people that spread is bad. That infection is bad. It's bad in the long term. It's not just bad in the short term. It's bad for all of us. And we're tired. We don't want people to clap. Stop clapping. We don't want people to sing. We don't want any of those things. We want you to do the right thing, to protect our city, protect our families, protect our children, of all people, protect our children. This is not about even me or my children. You know, I like Jennifer, I'm going to choose to keep my son at school, at home, instead of school. I can keep my kids safe, but I cannot keep the whole world safe if you keep going out there and creating conditions for more variants to come. And we're tired. We're tired. So please do something. Someone else do something.
Thank you,
Dr. Will,
Marie.
I'm sorry. Dr. Will, I mentioned in my opening remarks about my middle daughter who had a really difficult battle. She's a nurse. And she believes she contracted COVID in the hospital. So I understand when you say tired, and I understand, you know, the emotion there, as well as, you know, it's not just a profession. You're a human being as well as all the other medical professionals, and it's a challenge. And when you see what's happening in other states around this country, it reminds you of March of 2020. So. You know,
Yes.
I hear you.
All the love to your daughter.
Thank you. And to you as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're gonna move on. We'll have another chance for an open dialogue in a few. So right now we'll have Rima to speak on building preparedness and readiness. Thank you.
Greetings, President Cannizzaro. My name is Rima Izquierdo, and I am the parent of 4 children currently in the New York City public school system in the Bronx across 3 schools and districts, 3 with asthma and 3 with special needs. School buildings are not ready to reopen at full capacity, and the agencies charged with overseeing them are not currently equipped, nor are there policies, protocols, and procedures in place to address the myriad of issues that will inevitably arise, and no plan in sight. Let's talk about protocols. June 30th, the guidance for reopening followed during the regular school year apparently ended, and when summer school started, the regulations for operation were different, from school to busing to the situation room. Where was the notification for such changes? When were families provided informed consent to sign off on this new guidance, or rather lack of guidance? This information was not included in the summarizing, summer school, or Chapter 683 documentation parents had to sign when registering our children for summer programming. When were principals notified that yellow busing no longer had social distancing mandates, that test and trace now closes at 3:30, and to close a school would require 4 classroom closures and not 4 or more positive COVID cases as initially alluded to? Now let's discuss test and trace and the situation room. Parents and staff have been repeatedly reassured that test and trace in the situation room are equipped to handle the cases and investigations throughout the school year. The situation room does not actually investigate anything and do not go out to the schools. The school's administrators are responsible for all the steps of the investigation and submission to the situation room. Everything is done via email. When a 24-hour investigation is launched, still no one is sent to the school, and any extra information needed must again be provided solely by the administrators via school staff. One of my schools about 2 weeks ago had 7 positive COVID cases and did not close as promised when we signed up for summer school. All constituencies of my school community wanted a closure, begged for a closure, even if it was just to wait for the 24-hour investigation to be completed, which was extended twice. During the investigation, my administration was not contacted by the situation room, DOH, or test and trace once. After 3 extensions and the weekend, it was eventually communicated that the investigation was unfounded. How thorough could this investigation have possibly been if no one in the school community was contacted, even though a 24-hour investigation took 5 days to complete? Additionally, the situation room not being accessible after 3:30 to principals bodes the issue of delays in reporting, which means delays in quarantines and increased chances of exposure. My child was a close contact in the 7 cases my school experienced. By the time quarantine protocols had kicked in, my child had been exposed 2 different times. Many families in my school had the same experience. In practice, the system we currently use is not working and will not be adequate when 100% of our students are returning to school. This experience on a massive scale is not how we want to welcome our students back to school, and feels a lot like where we were last August. It is extremely unsettling and disturbing to think what will happen when all students return to the buildings and classes are at full capacity. Families are very concerned, particularly those that share space with other schools. Small class sizes have clear, concrete research as to the educational instructional benefits, but there is a lot to be said about the safety implications as well. A remote option would not only put the families with members who have underlying conditions or general anxiety at ease, but it would help increase our safety in terms of minimizing the amount of people on public transportation, yellow buses, and in our schools and communities as a whole. As parents and caregivers of the most disproportionately affected borough in New York City, our students are our #1 priority, and by extension, their staff. Our administrators should not be left to just figure things out or have promised imaginary support that after a year they are still waiting to receive. Please help us help you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I could probably use you at the bargaining table with me, because we've been saying things like that regarding the support for our administrators for quite some time. You know, one of the first things you asked is when were principals notified regarding some of the changes. And what has been the unfortunate reality is the CSA generally gets notified a few minutes before a press conference that the mayor is about to have. The principals don't know at the moment that the mayor announces it, and the principals don't know. The superintendents don't know the mayor was about to announce it. And then what happens is the mayor announces some global policy without details, and parents start asking the principals what it means, and the principals don't have the answers. And this is something that we've been asking about and complaining about long before COVID, but especially with COVID. And yeah, it's a concern. You know, the Department of Education claims that they are ramping up the Situation Room and all of the responses to the point, but it's going to be a major concern where we had about 20 to 25% of the students in a building on any given day in September, maybe a little bit more towards the end of the year. And now we're going to have most, if not all, of the students in school. And if the numbers continue, you know, a couple of months ago, I was a lot more optimistic that the numbers, or about a month ago, that the numbers were going down in such a way that we'd really be able to pull this off without, you know, the big numbers. And I pray that the numbers reverse and go back down, and that people do what they need to do, those that can get vaccinated and all of those things. But your concerns are legitimate. I can tell you that the department does have some very good people working in the school facilities areas, and they are doing what they can, and they are putting it, you know, taking care of the ventilation systems to the best of their ability, and they are making sure all of the PPE equipment is there, and they really are. And the principals and their teachers are doing every single thing that they can to do the best that they can. But your concerns are spot on as far as the increased number of people and the capacity, if these numbers continue to go the way they seem to be going, the capacity to handle all of this. And you know, just last year, principals were up until all hours of the night getting phone calls from the Situation Room, trying to contact families late at night. So I certainly don't look forward to that happening again, nor do I think school leaders do. And at the same time, look, you know, I would love to be able to say, you know, you don't have any concerns, and this is going to be fine, and you know, all families, you know, should not have those concerns. I can tell you that there are health and safety concerns all the time, not just with COVID, but they are certainly going to be greater now, and that's just the fact of what we have going on right now. But I can tell you, with their heart and soul, the people in the schools will be doing everything they can to protect the children. But again, you know, some of the things you talked about, we can have promises from the DOE. We'll believe it when we see it, and I hope they can. I really do hope they can do what they say they can do.
Thank you so much, President Cannizzaro. So I want to put it out there. We're running a little bit behind schedule. I hope you're a little flexible with your time so we can get everyone in. Thank you so much. And so now we will move to academics and instruction, and Angela Torres will present. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much, President Cannizzaro. I want to actually begin by thanking you and the CSA for all of your hard work and efforts in ensuring that the schools got fully funded, and your partnership with the City Council really made that a reality. We're super excited about that. But now that funding is here, there's great work to be accomplished to provide optimal academic instruction for our greatest treasures, who are our children. So with that newfound funding, we want to make sure that it gets used in ways where we build our students' overall performance while making sure that they keep their mental needs at the heart of every programming decision. Why? Because they've been so impacted by trauma. And so we want to make sure that our kids and our teachers and our staff are kept in the forefront of our minds when we make each one of these decisions. So firstly, I want to address the topic of academic testing. Although testing does provide data from which teachers are able to reshape their curriculum, additional testing may also cause a situation where teachers are given yet another test to prepare for, and then they teach to the test. So currently, new academic testing is set to be mandated for students. So we want to know how the CSA feels about another layer of academic testing being added, such as the MAP testing, which is supposed to be given 3 times a year. What will the social emotional impact of this added layer of testing be upon students who've endured so much and perhaps are at their breaking points due to the trauma that they have endured? The type of trauma that these students have endured is perhaps greater than what they've ever experienced in their lifetime, and maybe even in the lifetime of previous generations. So we would like the CSA to contemplate whether the benefits of additional testing exceed the additional pressures that are going to be placed upon students and principals. And there is still time for us to address this. So we want to leave that in your hands. Secondly, I would like to challenge the CSA to make sure that trauma-informed schools become a permanent part of the school's framework and not just a buzzword or a temporary solution for a deeply embedded wound. While academics are important, we would be remiss not to consider that kids have endured a tremendous amount of trauma. In response to our collective acknowledgement of the fact, many principals participated in trauma-informed schools training, and we do believe that that's a step in the right direction, but we are not done. The work is great, but the CSA can be at the forefront so that so much more will be accomplished to heal even the deepest of wounds. We would like to see how principals will work towards creating healing-centered schools. We want to reimagine schools to include additional hiring of support staff to deal with the new needs of students and families in the wake of trauma, because there are new needs that have emerged. We want to reimagine schools to make sure that principals in the needy schools are being supported adequately. We implore that the principals of schools and communities that were hard hit by COVID, especially here in the Bronx, continue to be supported to create school cultures that support teachers and staff who interact with kids who have experienced trauma and loss. There are many kids who have experienced loss. We recognize the fact that kids have experienced great loss, but we equally want to elevate the fact that teachers and staff have experienced tremendous trauma as well. And the success of our students rests heavily upon the supports put into place to help principals and teachers as well. We know that the CSA can fight for school supervisors and administrators to ensure that the policies reflect the greater good for the sake of our children and our principals, our teachers, and our staff. The pandemic elevated other issues and placed them at the forefront. All of a sudden, we were forced to see that there was a digital divide that existed, acknowledge that Wi-Fi for all must become an imminent reality, and come to the realization that literacy is essential to the overall success of our students and society as a whole. Thanks to the assistance of the CSA, we now have the schools being fully funded 100%. But the question is, now what? How will the CSA support bridging the digital divide with laptops, technology, and universal broadband? How will the CSA advocate for true solutions for literacy, such as the adherence to the law for libraries and librarians in school? The CSA has shown its ability to make even the seemingly impossible, AKA the 100% funding of schools, a reality. And now we're calling upon you to take it to the next level. Now that the funding is here, it's our charge to the CSA to make sure there's a responsible use of incoming funds to make a lasting effect. We want to make sure that the policies and programming make sense in the wake of a pandemic that we have not even fully emerged from. We're still there. We want to continue to ensure that we eradicate any other divides, such as the digital divides that creates a system where we have the haves and we have the have-nots, but level the playing field by building infrastructure that supports Wi-Fi for all. We desire to continue to move in the direction of standardized curriculum across the system with differentiation, especially for our kids in District 75 schools and our English language learners. We desire to work towards creating virtual platforms that work across the uniform platform and can be engaging so that virtual learning pivots can occur seamlessly with time to plan for training amongst staff and students alike. This can be done. This is within our reach. This is within your reach so that you can help us get there. So we want the CSA and everyone to be at the table for the development of such a system so that it works for all parties involved. And parents want to be involved in the process and be given push notifications as updates occur on a universal parent notification system that doesn't exist yet, but we can make that happen, to keep us informed and engaged about the most important aspects of our child's education. Lastly, but definitely not least, we need to make sure that healing-centered schools are made a priority. We know that this is all possible. And with the support of CSA, We have seen what you are able to do and what you're able to elevate. So it will not just be a thought, but it will become a reality that will transform our schools and our world as a whole. Thank you so much.
Wow, I thought you were on fire on July 1st, but that was, oh, wow. You really very, very impressive and comprehensive. And I know I'm not going to remember everything you said to be able to address every point that you made. First of all, really, as far as fair student funding is concerned, thank you to everyone. AQE, I don't know if you folks work with AQE at all, but AQE did a tremendous job. You know, that was many, many years of fighting for fair student funding. And the thing about fair student funding is that's the funds just to get us to what we need to provide a fair basic education based on the DOE's own formula. There are a lot of things that need to be done above and beyond fair student funding. And, you know, some of the things you were speaking about are part of that. I wrote down a few things, so I'm going to try to address some of what you said. As far as testing is concerned, you know, look, testing has become the problem that it's become, I believe, because of the undue stress, pressure, and importance we've placed on testing. We are talking about children. We should be testing children to assess them and try to help them grow. And instead, what I recall students in my building, and it broke my heart to hear a child say, I'm a 1. What does that mean? That means I scored a 1 on a test, and that's how they were valuing their self. I hope and believe, and you know, we have been talking to the DOE about this, that these tests are not in any way, shape, or form used in anything other than, hey, let's see how you can do, and then we're going to adjust from there as far as your educational program is concerned. And in that regard, teachers test every day by asking questions. They teach every day by doing homework and looking at homework and independent work. And that's what this should be. If it turns out to be something different, you will hear CSA loud and clear. Okay, so I can tell you that. As far as trauma is concerned, you know, it's such an interesting thing. We deal with trauma when we're not in a pandemic, and it has been only magnified so much through the pandemic. You know, we receive an email anytime we lose a child or a staff member in the New York City Department of Education. And, you know, there was a time in the height of this pandemic in New York City that we were getting 2, 3, and 4 a day, whether it was a family member that the CSA field staff would let me know of, you know, one of our folks' family members, a child's family member, or a child or an adult in a home of our children. And it was traumatic to me without knowing the people, right? So this trauma is real, and we understand it. And while I'm often criticizing the Department of Education, I do have to step back and give some compliments to Dr. LaShawn Robinson and her team, because they have been working all summer long trying to prepare schools and school leaders and principals and everyone for the incoming trauma that they're about to be dealing with. And it is going to be a work in progress. It is going to be, you know, a long time coming, and it's going to be difficult. But I do have to tell you that there is a full department of people at the Department of Education with a heart. They care, they're smart, and they're compassionate. And I would suggest, in addition to what we're doing with them, that if there's a small team or a cohort of people from this committee, from this group, trying to get a meeting with Dr. LaShawn Robinson and just hearing from her, because she's a person who really cares, and she is doing a lot of great work. The CSA is also partnered with Dr. Mark Brackett from Yale University, and he's nationally known for the Center of Emotional Intelligence, and he does a lot of work preparing adults, because I mentioned the trauma even if it's not we have plenty of adults that had personal family trauma as well, that it's going to be harder for them to help people unless they can help themselves. But just the trauma of seeing children in crisis and other trauma, adults need this social and emotional work as well, and in order for them to try to help children through some of the things. As far as the digital divide is concerned, I don't know how much you've seen, but we've been out there constantly since the beginning when children weren't getting the devices that they needed, and pushing. And when we go public with those type of things, it makes people jump. Librarians, we're of course, the state law says there's a librarian in every school, and libraries should be there. So there's no excuses for them not to be, and in places where they're not, we certainly support them being there. And then the last thing I jotted down is you mentioned District 75 and our English language learners. And of course, in everything we do, they have to be front and center. Children that are, facing challenges for one reason or another, whether it's a language challenge or a barrier, or it's some type of emotional or academic challenge, we need to be there for them. And I have to shout out our District 75 principals, teachers, paraprofessionals, school aides, because they're really doing some God's great work. And they are some of our most dedicated people. So we're in support of anything we can do to help children through this. That's why we chose this profession. We didn't do it to get rich. We did it because we love kids and we want to give back. So anything we can do to help there, we're happy to.
Thank you so much, President Cannizzaro. And now we will have Sandra De Jesus speak on school culture.
Good evening, all. School culture. You spoke earlier about we're having a lot of bullying in the schools, the DOE, bullying parents. You spoke earlier about lack of communication and transparency. And I want to know what you meant when you were speaking about the communication and transparency, because we have none in the schools, none with the parents. And I want to ensure that we have masks and the masks stay on. And I don't think the remote learning should be taken away. I have a granddaughter that was in remote learning. She did very well. She was nominated Student of the Year. She excelled with her remote learning. And I would love to keep that on the table for kids and parents as well. So the transparency to me is that they're not being fair with the parents. They're not letting us know anything. They're just keeping us left out with whatever information that we need. They're not supplying us with it. So I want to know how you can help us with that.
So what I was referring to earlier when I talked about the transparency was their transparency with us and giving us the details that we need so that we can be transparent with the families, right? So what has happened, unfortunately, in too many cases is we've been left without clear guidance. So when something is announced and you as a parent go to the principal and ask, we don't have the answers for you. And that's what's caused, I think, a lot of the issues. And sadly, those issues often stay at the school level, and the principals are frustrated because they want to be able to provide answers. They just don't have the answers. As far as the masks are concerned, all right, so we definitely will have a mask mandate, but let's be honest and open and clear with each other. If the department refuses to be and the city refuses to be, I won't be. I'm not going to refuse to be. Children are children, and there are days and times and moments where children who are supposed to be wearing their mask will pull their mask down. That is going to happen. We can't avoid that happening. The adults will do the best they can always to have the children, keep their masks on and keep them on correctly. And we also understand that for some children, especially the younger ones, it can be difficult all day, and there's going to happen to be opportunities where children have a spot to go to maybe take a mask break or so on. But Masks are important. They've been mandated, but look, the fact to be able for anyone to say to you, I can guarantee you that mask will be on at all moments, every second. That's not reality. So folks are doing the best they can. They will do the best they can. They will not, shirk that responsibility, but to expect that they will make sure that it never, that there's never a transgression, that can't be real either.
Thank you so much, President Cannizzaro. And now we will have Amy Tsai lead right into what was discussed just now and talk about parent empowerment and the empowerment of the PAs.
Good evening, CSA President Mark Cannizzaro. My name is Amy Tsai. I am one of the leaders here at the Bronx Parent Leaders Advocacy Group. I am also a CC member for Citywide Council for District 75. I am also a mom of 5 Bronx students in several school settings and several school districts. And my children, all of my children, had caught COVID last year. The sacrifice that my children went through, they were in full remote. And in March, because of the learning loss that my kindergarten was having, I put him back into school. The first week, my son was the second day he was sick with COVID, caught COVID in the classroom. And as you aware, kindergarten students were not required to get tested. They didn't have the same guidelines as other students in the building, even though there was kindergartens and first graders in the same floor. Resulted in a domino effect that all of my other children who were in full remote had COVID. And my husband has long COVID due to the severity of COVID symptoms. So I've gone through it. My biggest concern with having 3 children that have special needs is my sacrifice as a parent and for my constituents that I represent. It's always been the highest level of priority for parent leaders to bridge that communication, engagement, and empowerment between parents and the school community. So spring of this year, parents was really hoping that we can look forward to some kind of normalcy with improvements. But when the announcement came before 4 out of the 5 boroughs were even had an opportunity for feedback of what the school September would look like, we were left out of that forum. We were not given an opportunity to voice for our voiceless children, our children with special needs, our families that are in temporary housing, our children who are in foster care, and our families that had a language barrier that couldn't really be that voice for their child. And so going into language access has been one of the barriers prior to pandemic and during this pandemic that highlighted for our students who are learning remote learning and our parents getting that information. One of the parents who is actually a parent member of CEC 9 herself, she didn't have all the information because there was an English barrier. And there was not enough for her to advocate for her family as well as her families in her neighborhood. And so that is one of the barriers that really puts parents not inclusive at the table to make right decisions, the sake of their lives versus going into in person for during this pandemic of COVID-19 that still exists. It has not gone. Second, the accessibility for many of our parents who have children with special needs or themselves who are disabled, and for some of our students that are raised by their grandparents or family members, they have not been included at the table with a full course of communication or just a feedback giving to the mayor or the chancellor's office. And lastly, as I think everyone kind of mentioned, District 75, we have over 380 locations in 60 school organizations over these 5 boroughs. All of our students, majority, ride the school bus. And yet there's no guidance exactly what it is under COVID-19. We have 12-month program, Chapter 683. What it was like, children on top of each other, no social distancing, kids were on a bus that are unmasked when they were supposed to be masked. I mean, I understand that, a lot of our children can't wear masks, but the end result is that us parents are concerned what is going to happen to our child when it's too late. And the other part is our children don't have enough permanent nurses in school buildings. So even the guidance of expectations of a phone call from a nurse saying what's going on for your child, that guidance is not clear. So just to round it up, we live in a diverse city in the Bronx, where it's underserved and unresourced, and a healthcare system that's a flaw. And our voice hasn't been at the table for this upcoming school year. So thank you for listening to us, giving us your time and our thoughts. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm sorry to hear you went through such a personal difficulty with COVID. And I certainly hope that everyone is feeling better now. But yeah, I mean, I mentioned I had a couple children with COVID, and they were older children. And to think about what you must have gone through is difficult and heartbreaking. As far as the engagement and the communication is concerned with families, schools themselves do everything they can to communicate with the families, and obviously some are going to be better than others. But like I mentioned earlier, there are times that we haven't had the information that we've needed as well. But what I can tell you is this: you folks have a pretty good platform, and you should be demanding answers from the superintendents and above regarding these things. Now, the superintendents may not have been included in some of the information either, but when they hear from families, they will find out the information they need to find out and get to you. The District 75 superintendent is very active, and he's all over the place, but you need answers regarding things like the bus. And there will be children on the bus that can't mask, but you should know that. You should know that, and you should know how many students are going to be on the bus and so on. All of the things that you mentioned as far as accessibility are problems that are not difficult to overcome if people put their heads together. We have the department in the city has a very big translation service that can handle most languages. We are now able to do lots of Zoom type of things that we weren't able to do, so that if a family or a parent or someone has physical limitations to get them into a building, they should be able to set up some type of discussion on Zoom. And the other thing I would say, again, I know there are many CEC members here. These are platforms that you need to also discuss at the CEC meetings, the communication pieces. And I do agree with you that this is one of the things that has been lost the last several years with the Department of Education. And I don't necessarily blame the Department of Education. It's because so many decisions are micromanaged at City Hall that the decisions are made, and then everyone is sort of playing catch up, trying to find out what that decision means or what that statement means. So you folks really do have a legitimate issue with trying to get information earlier, trying to have input into that information. And what I find so ironic about that statement I just made is our principals are evaluated by their superintendents based on how well they communicate. So if they're being evaluated based on how well they communicate and how much information they provide, well, then the city and those above them should be doing the same thing and modeling that type of behavior and inclusive behavior. And when I say involving parents, I talked about it in the very beginning. It doesn't always mean that you agree on everything, but it means that you're transparent, you tell the truth, you're honest, and you have an open discussion about what it is, and you try to come to the best solution. And as long as all sides are in this for the best interest of the kids, it usually works out just fine. So that's what this is all about. And I feel for you when I hear you And we've been calling for better communication, more transparency for the longest time, and we will continue to do so. You know, maybe if we continue to do so now and this administration doesn't hear us, maybe the next one will. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, President Cannizzaro. And now we will have Zanis and Paulette present on funding and budgets.
Good evening, President Cannizzaro. My name is Professor Zanis Figueroa. I have a master's degree in English literature with a minor in philosophy of education and ontology. Principals are complaining the funds they raise through grants and private entities are being controlled by the DOE, and the DOE uses and distributes these funds as they see fit. This is really very unfair to our students. In allowing our principals to access and manage said funds, our students' needs could be met in a timely fashion. As we all know, students living in low-income communities receive the least amount of funds towards their education from the Department of the DOE, which could in turn provide an education of quality and a learning experience that fosters a life for success, as our students are our future. Who better than principals, teachers, and parents to address the needs of our students whom they have first knowledge of? I'm asking, how can CSA help principals to be allowed to access and manage funds that they have raised for their individual schools?
Well, you know, I'm really not aware of this exact problem. And the first thing I would need to do is maybe if you could put one of those principals in touch with CSA, whether that's Frank Patterson up in the Bronx or directly here to CSA, so we can get the specifics and look into how we can address this. I do know there are some rules around some types of grants, but I would like to know specifically what this issue is to find out exactly what's happening, and then try to advocate for those specific folks. Because I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not familiar exactly with what you're saying, so I would need to speak to a principal that is experiencing this problem.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Cannizzaro. I'm Paulette Healy. I'm here on behalf of Parents for Responsive, Equitable, Safe Schools, or Press NYC. I'm also a returning member of the Citywide Council on Special Education. My son is a D75 student and a youth activist himself. And I also have a child in District 20, which is the third most overcrowded district in Brooklyn South across the city. I know that my colleague Angela Torres spoke brilliantly about trauma that has been suffered across the city, and especially with our students. And I have 3 topics that I'm going to ask you and 3 questions at the end of each topic. So start taking notes. And just to frame, the first part is about trauma, and just to frame it, I have to log off at 8 o'clock tonight because we're holding a tribute for my aunt that we lost last year from COVID. She was the first of 11 that we had lost last year. And this year, we've already lost 2 more. And these were 2 family members that were fully vaccinated. They had underlying conditions, but this is the worst kind of deja vu I could possibly ask for. But that being said, my first topic is about trauma. And when New York City released its Bridge to School plan late last year in August, officials called on teachers to make students' mental health needs their top priority. The COVID-19 pandemic, combined with months of quarantine, excessive job loss, and a national reckoning on racial injustice, had resulted in significant stress, trauma, grief, and loss for our children and our families. Many of our children and families are still in pain. As a result, in April 2021, the mayor announced that the DOE would be hiring 500 social workers, psychologists, family support workers, totaling 6,000 mental health workers in our schools. But as of right now, we have only fulfilled 60% of those positions, leaving us woefully unprepared to serve our students and the trauma they will be carrying into the schools in September. We have already seen the effects of these staffing shortages during summer rising, when at-risk counseling was not made available and related services needed to be made up because there were shortages for speech, OT, and psychologist providers. So I ask, my first question is, how is the CSA prepared to support our principals with these staffing shortages ahead of us? Secondly, funding for repairs and upgrades for ventilation was not available last year. That is not the case this year. Our principals have work orders that have still not been fulfilled, and there are some that are being fulfilled, but not until September. However, the spaces that are being renovated are being calculated in the space planning spreadsheets that were released earlier this week. Principals from Tier 1 schools have said time and time again, 3 feet will not be possible in their overcrowded schools, leading to classrooms that will be bulging beyond capacity. Question number 2 to you is, how is the CSA prepared to protect our principals when without a remote option, our students in classrooms will be our students will be forced into classrooms bulging with over 40 people with staff included. Lastly, last year, the CSA made a public statement of no confidence when it came to the mayor's inequitable reopening plan for schools. As the positivity rates continue to rise, state ed has sent out guidelines that schools must be prepared to provide a remote option in case of school building closures. Will the CSA support the parent community, which at this point have been thousands, who have been asking the mayor to restore a remote option in order to keep the safety and our families of our children a priority?
All right, I'm going to try. I tried to write as fast as I could. That was quite a lot. Okay. As far as preparing or supporting people that need the social workers and the mental health professionals that don't have them, again, if the principals reach out to us, those are the ones that need them, are supposed to have them. We will advocate on their behalf. I can tell you that we are sometimes successful. Sometimes we get, we're working on getting them. We're interviewing, we're finding, we're trying, and those type of responses back. But if the principals let us know that they need folks for these related type of services, we will be there supporting those principals individually. That's like an individual piece, because we could say it out loud and they'll say we have them and we have no one to point to. So they just need to reach out to their field directors at CSA and we can advocate for them. As far as the Tier 1 schools, we've been in touch with the Tier 1 schools regularly, and we continue to be in touch, and we are advocating for them, and we've been. And I got to tell you something, many of them are terrifically advocating for themselves as well, which makes me very, very proud that they are doing so. I haven't run into anyone who's telling me they're going to be over 40 individuals yet in a single room. I'd be interested to speak to those people, but I do know that some of the high schools at 34 students with an adult or two will be, at 35 and 36 in a room in order to accommodate, but we will certainly, reach out there. As far as, the state guidance, we have been talking that, the one thing I think that everybody is aware of and agrees with is that if nothing else, right, they need to be prepared to pivot to remote learning in the event that we have to pivot to remote learning system-wide. So there will be a mechanism, or at least according to the Department of Education and what we've been discussing, there will be a mechanism to pivot if we need to pivot or if we're told to pivot. Whether or not we'll get the mayor to go any further than that, I have no idea. Again, he hasn't engaged us in that conversation either. So, we've been pushing and we'll continue to push. Right, it's been our biggest issue just the last couple of days of what the social distancing guidelines actually mean and where they are. But we have a lot of work cut out for us. We will be there and we will be advocating and we will be pushing. But again, I do have to stress to everyone, and I hope you do understand. I think you do understand this, that we're an advocacy group for our members, for the children of New York City, for the school system. But we don't ultimately make the decisions. Last year, some people were saying, well, you open schools, you close schools. No, what we do is we take our directions. The mayor is still the boss and the chancellor is still the boss. When we don't like what they say, we publicly state it, but they're still the boss. So we are behind, especially the principals. I mean, I work for the principals, and when they're struggling and they have an issue, all they need to do is let us know, and we'll be advocating for them to the best of our ability.
Thank you. Just for clarity, were you aware that in some of the space capacity spreadsheets that were given to the tier 1 schools, that they included calculations such as 28 people can fit into the principal's office, 25 people can fit into a storage closet, and that 17 people can fit into a broom closet? These were part of the calculations. So
I would love to get those specifics as well to just push back on them with those type of things. What I was aware of is that the DOE was using raw square footage, not accounting for necessarily bookcases that might be in the room and taking up some space. But what you just told me, I don't even mean to laugh, but it's just beyond something I can comprehend.
Yeah, I'll make sure that I reach out to my principals and they make you aware of that, because it's happening a lot in tier 1 schools, because again, this is where they're trying to justify that 3 feet can be accommodated. But if their medium is from 20 to 32, based off of the fact that they can fit 28 children in the principal's office as a classroom, that totally skews that data. So, so I'll make sure that I have them reach out to you specifically.
Yeah. Look, the interesting thing, and this is what I've been saying all along too, is they looked at these tier 1 schools because they are the most overcrowded schools, but they are not the only schools that will be unable to accommodate 3 feet of distancing. And that's what I've been saying for months and months and months. And at that time, the answer was it's 3 feet where possible. And we understand in some places won't be 3 feet. And now I'm not sure we got some very confusing information the last couple of days. So it's becoming a whole nother issue. So that's why you saw me make some statements recently in the press.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Paulette and President Cannizzaro. So Paulette actually opened up open discussion segment by asking that follow-up question. So now I believe Tom Shepard, who is the co-founder for this group, actually wants to say something. Tom, you have about a minute. So we'll be generous to you, maybe a minute and a half.
All right, I'll try to make this quick, right? President Cannizzaro, thank you for taking the time to meet with us. And there are a couple of things I just want to kind of reiterate, right? So you've heard all sorts of reasons why a remote option is important and necessary for our families, right? One of the things that I want to just briefly touch on again, because it's been mentioned a lot, is trauma. And, I can tell you as a veteran who copes with PTSD, right? So this is personal for me. I understand that healing and recovery for some people can happen quickly, right? But I also understand that healing and recovery for some people never happen. And I think given the unique circumstances that the unique position we find ourselves in right now, dealing with a pandemic, right? And just how this has played out disproportionately, right? In communities like the Bronx and communities in Brooklyn and communities all over the city. But I'm going to focus on the Bronx because it played out disproportionately here, right? Like we took it on the chin harder than, most other places in this city. I say all of that because I believe that a system should be responsive to both, right? So if you have people that can recover quickly, then coming back into a school building absolutely should be an option, right? But if you have people that are dealing with trauma, that are just as terrified of coming back into a school building, right? Because of what they have experienced over the last year and a half, right? I think that a system should not put that healing on some sort of 2-month arbitrary timeline and then subject people to coming back into a system that they're not ready to come back into. So I'm going to say that. And then there are two other things. One, I share your pain because I'm also a member of the PEP. I'm the CEC President's appointee to the Panel for Educational Policy. And I share your pain with the sort of surprise nature of announcements and the way that they happen, right? Because it sets everyone else up to have to try to figure it out, when having a discussion with people ahead of time can help maybe the mayor's office and the DOE develop things that work, right? So I share your pain there. The last thing I'm going to say is I find all of this eerily reminiscent to last year in August, right? When like I sat at that PEP meeting, it was my second PEP meeting, and we were on that Zoom call to almost 4 a.m. with like 160 people giving 2-minute testimonies, one after the other, saying we need a remote option, right? We need for schools to not open until they're ready to open. And ultimately, we got this sort of patchwork, deal where schools didn't open on the first day, and then, a couple of weeks later, some schools open, and then the week after that, some other schools. And I just think that causes chaos for parents, and it inflicts more trauma on parents in communities where we are the shift workers, right? We are the ones that have to figure out how to plan our lives in uncertainty, right? And to know exactly what we're dealing with gives us the opportunity to plan our lives in such a way where we can keep our kids safe, right? Where we can make sure that the resources that our schools need, they have, to make sure that the buildings are safe, and to make sure that everyone ultimately gets the education and the social emotional supports that they need. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your service. To hear you're struggling with certain things, I just hope that you continue to heal and do better every day. And I mean that as far as your service to this country. Thank you. I'll go back to what you talked about last year in August and sort of the surprise. What happened last year in August was some really bad decisions by the department regarding hybrid instruction and the need for so many more teachers. And it was sort of, like you said, reminiscent, because here we are on August 13th, and just today, the department sent a survey to principals regarding, how many of them could, properly socially distance the kids. That should have been something that was done in April or May or whenever, and even now when they get the results, I don't know how they think they're going to make the proper plans to do that. And then to your point regarding the surprise announcements of the PEP on a regular basis, I think you really said something that was important here. Sometimes the city and the DOE and others can come out with ideas that, whether we like them completely or not, with enough time, we could work with them to make them probably productive for everyone if they would just listen. Because any idea that anyone that comes up with on a global plan, on a global scale, we can't anticipate every negative consequence ahead of time, which is why we engage other people that have different perspectives, families that are talking about how is this going to affect my children, teachers and staff wondering how can I implement this at the school level. So that's a great missing piece that has happened recently and the last several years under this administration. And hopefully that will change. So I hear you, I agree with you, and I'm just hoping for some better communication. Many of the things I heard today were all sort of tied in together, right? It was one theme or another was like, be transparent, open, and let us know what's going on, and listen to us. And the final thing I'm going to say, I'm going to repeat actually, is there are some very powerful people on this panel and some incredibly thoughtful, well-spoken, intelligent people who can frame an argument in a very precise way. I think you should try to, again, use your influence to get a meeting with City Hall administration, whether that's through the PEP, through the CEC, or wherever you can. So at the very least, you will know that you're being listened to. It's a lot easier to say yes or no when you're not speaking to the human beings that are being affected. To get in front of the people that are being affected, well, it carries a different weight. And if you're still going to say no to them, at least you've listened to them and heard them and made sure that you've considered their perspective. So I think that, as much influence as I have, I honestly believe you have more. And I would hope that, you make sure that you are heard loud and clear by whomever it is that needs to hear from City Hall.
Thank you so much, President Cannizzaro. And now we will move to closing statements. And so I'll give you a minute to catch your breath. So we'll change it around a little bit and have Dr. Eduardo Hernandez close us out, and then we'll give you the last word.
Greetings, Mr. Cannizzaro. It's nice to see you again. It's been a couple of years since we met in person. I just want to point out that this that you're doing now, supporting parents, is not new. You've been doing that. I remember myself and a group of CSC members went to you for support when we were going to Albany, and you did not hesitate, and you came through with the support. So this is not new for you, and we really appreciate. School principals for me always are in a rock and a hard place. They always get stuck to implement policies that they have no input on it. They need to deal with these contractuals and backroom deals from the UFT, and they're still expected to perform and to make sure that the kids get their education. So it was something like I always saw in some meetings when we had collocations where I knew principals were not even for those things. They're against those plans, but yet every time the superintendent would claim that they were in full support of it, I will call them out. I always call them out and tell them, no, they're not in support of it, but they'll do their job because that's what they do. So I'm always amazed on that. So I had a long-winded statement, but I'm gonna cut it short because of the time. So here we go. We understand that the vast majority of children may benefit the most by being in the classroom, but we also know that for many of them, remote learning is a better option. Overcrowding will make it impossible to maintain social distances and will also lead to schools to fail to properly provide services for academic intervention and social emotional support. Many of our school buildings have rooms without windows or ventilation that were used to provide services to students, but should no longer be available for those purposes. Fans do not provide a proper ventilation and are not conducive to prevent the spread of viruses. Mask mandate should not be a substitute for the lack of social distancing and poor ventilation, as children and adults are likely to take off their masks from time to time to relieve discomfort or to be heard or to drink or eat. It is deceitful and irresponsible to continue to spread the message that our schools are the safest environment because of their very low number of COVID cases. That conclusion is based on data obtained where there was only a small amount of students and staff in the buildings and class schedules that allow for the implementation of an aggressive sanitization protocol. Based on that data, it will be unethical to predict how truly safe our schools will be once they're at their full capacity, many of them overcrowded. As cases of the Delta variant continue to rise among small children, combined with the stagnation of the rate of vaccinations, there should be no doubt that once the school fully reopened, there will be positive COVID cases that will force classrooms and school closures. It is irresponsible for the mayor and the DOE not to develop a plan that will equitably address these closures and that will allow for a smooth transition with minimum educational and emotional impact for the children and their families. We cannot wait until closures happen to rush into an untested remote learning option. Along with the in-person programs developed by each school, the DOE must also develop a comprehensive and holistic remote option that addresses the educational and mental health needs of our children, especially our historically underserved population, namely children with special needs, English language learners, and students in temporary housing. Some teachers have floated the idea of creating district and citywide remote programs. We believe that the DOE should support the development of such programs because they would reduce the burden placed on each individual school to develop their own remote learning models. This program should provide a more consistent and homogeneous platform that should greatly reduce the inequities currently found at schools within their own districts and across the city and bring true equity to our current educational system. The UFT also needs to be actively involved in the development of the remote option. The statement by the UFT leadership that, quote, New York City educators want their students physically in front of them this fall, end quote, showed a clear disconnect and or blatant disregard for the concern of their own members, as many teachers have been fighting alongside parents, publicly voicing their demands for the remote option. Our political and educational leaders need to take off the rosy-colored glasses and come up with a plan that addresses the current reality. Instead of clamoring for a return to normal, they need to consider that the new normal is different than what it was prior to the pandemic, and they must plan accordingly. They need to take this opportunity to really address the disparities that disproportionately has historically affected our underserved communities. These disparities are embedded within the fabric of our educational system, which are part of the previous normal and must be dismantled. New York prides itself in being a leading progressive city, but when it comes to education, it remains stuck inside the box. The same box that perpetuates discrimination and marginalization of the underserved children in our communities. It is time for New York City to be innovative and create a system that truly enhances the educational experience of all its children. New York City needs to once again be a leader instead of following everyone else on a beaten path that continues to perpetuate inequities. Many children with social anxieties, as well as children that suffer from bullying at schools, thrive while remote learning at the comfort of their homes without the exposure to triggers that prevent them from fully immersing in learning in their classroom. Attending schools in person may prove fatal for children, educators, school leaders, staff, and their respective family members if any of them is immunocompromised. We would like to thank you, Mr. Cannizzaro, for coming to this space to listen to parents, and we hope that you and your members, the school's administrator, continue to support our fight for a remote option. We call upon the UFT leadership to follow your example, as well as other educational and political leaders, and come to the table for a healthier discussion. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and DOE Chancellor Misha Porter must develop a plan for a remote option for the next school year with the collaboration of parents, school leaders, educators, staff, and other community stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's good. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Thank you so much, Eduardo, and the floor is yours, Mr. Cannizzaro.
So thank you so much for your kind words, and it is nice to see you again. I think I've pretty much responded to everything already, so I'm not going to keep people here longer. But really, I tell you, engaging with families this way is important, and it's critical. And I know that there are differences of opinion all over the city, but that's what makes this city great. I know different people feel different ways. I know the state came out with their guidance. The city hopefully will come out with some guidance soon. But I really hope that ultimately the mayor sits down and listens. And sit down and listen doesn't mean sit down and agree, but sit down and listen and hear what people have to say. Because you have all impressed me, and actually, I think I said it earlier, it brought me back to my days in the principal's office. It really, really warms my heart to see the passion, the love, the caring, the kindness, not just for your own children, but for the children of the city of New York and everywhere. And I think that love and compassion is what education is all about. You know, we talk about test scores and reading and writing and all those things, which are very, very important, but it's growing citizens who love and respect each other and are able to be productive parts of society that this is all about. And the type of conversations we're having right now, I think gives me great hope that all of your families are gonna grow up in the right way, and your kids will turn into be the leaders that you are. So thank you all so much. God bless you. I know we stayed a lot longer than we were supposed to, but that's okay too. I have a long commute home. I'm in trouble with my wife. So Farah, I need a note. I need a late note. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. You stayed over a half an hour extra. We really appreciate it. Have a great commute home. And next week, we'll do it again with some other high-profile folks who can help us in this fight. Have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Great.
Thank you.
so
Good night.
much. Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night, everyone.